It was 1955. Harry Truman had just left the White House. The Cold War was getting colder by the day, and somewhere deep inside a classified Lockheed facility in the California desert, a place so secret it didn't officially exist, a team of engineers were building something that would change the course of history. A spy plane, so high, so quiet, so invisible, that the Soviets wouldn't even know it was there until it was already gone. They called it the U-2. And here's the part that should stop you cold. It's still flying today. Not in a museum, not on a static display outside an Air Force base. Flying, right now, collecting intelligence that America's most advanced satellites, systems that cost billions of dollars and took decades to build, simply cannot provide. The question nobody in Washington wants to answer out loud is this: how does a 70-year-old airplane still do something $1 trillion worth of space technology cannot? That answer will surprise you. Now, on paper, this makes no sense whatsoever. We live in an age where satellites can read a license plate from orbit, where signals intelligence systems can intercept communications from the other side of the planet, where drones can loiter over a target for days without a pilot ever leaving the ground. And yet, the U-2 Dragon Lady is still flying combat missions, still climbing to the edge of space, still bringing home intelligence that makes 4-star generals sit up straight in their chairs. The Air Force has tried to retire it. Congress has argued about it. The Pentagon has studied it. And every single time, the conclusion is the same: we can't let it go. Because nothing replaces what it does. This is the story of why. It's a story about engineering genius, Cold War desperation, and one of the most remarkable aircraft ever built by American hands. And it's a story about why sometimes, the first time you get something exactly right, the future never quite catches up. To understand why the U-2 is irreplaceable, you have to understand the world it was born into. It was 1953. Stalin had just died. The Soviet Union was a black box, a massive nuclear-armed empire that America could barely see into. The CIA had almost no reliable intelligence on Soviet bomber production, missile development, or military positioning. They were flying blind. And flying blind against a nuclear-armed enemy wasn't just dangerous. It was potentially civilization-ending. President Eisenhower, a man who understood military intelligence better than almost any president before or since, authorized a program so classified that only a handful of people in the entire government knew it existed. The contract went to Lockheed's Skunk Works division, a small, brilliant team led by an engineer named Kelly Johnson, arguably the greatest aircraft designer America ever produced. Johnson had one requirement above all others: the airplane had to fly so high that Soviet fighters and missiles simply couldn't reach it. The answer was altitude, extreme altitude. Johnson designed an aircraft that was essentially a jet-powered glider. Long, impossibly slender wings spanning 103 feet that could generate enormous lift at altitudes where the air was almost non-existent. A single powerful engine. A cockpit so cramped the pilot had to wear a full pressure suit just to survive. And a camera system so advanced it could photograph a newspaper headline from 70,000 feet. When the U-2 first flew on August 1st, 1955, just 8 months after the contract was signed, it climbed to altitudes no aircraft had ever reached in operational service. Soviet radar could barely detect it. Their fighters couldn't get close. Their missiles couldn't touch it. For 4 years, the U-2 flew over the Soviet Union completely undetected. It photographed every major Soviet airbase, missile site, and military installation. It gave Eisenhower something no president had ever had before: a clear, accurate picture of exactly what the enemy was doing. Kelly Johnson and his team hadn't just built an airplane. They had built America's eye in the sky. Then came May 1st, 1960. A U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union by a surface-to-air missile. Powers survived. The wreckage was recovered. And one of the most embarrassing diplomatic incidents in American history unfolded on the world stage. Khrushchev was furious, Eisenhower was humiliated, and the entire U-2 program was exposed to the world. Most people assumed that was the end of the U-2. They were wrong, because even as the diplomatic fallout raged in Washington, the intelligence community was quietly making a decision. The U-2 was too valuable to ground, too capable to replace. The program continued, redirected toward other targets, other missions, other parts of the world where America desperately needed eyes. 2 years later, in October 1962, U-2 photographs of Cuba revealed Soviet nuclear missiles being installed just 90 miles from the Florida coast. Those photographs, taken by a U-2 pilot named Richard Heiser, triggered the Cuban Missile Crisis. They were the evidence that convinced President Kennedy the threat was real. They were the intelligence that brought the world to the edge of nuclear war, and ultimately pulled it back. Without the U-2, America might never have known those missiles were there until it was too late. That's not a footnote in history, that's the whole story. Here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part that surprises most people. When the first American reconnaissance satellites came online in the early 1960s, programs like Corona, the assumption was that they would make the U-2 obsolete. Why risk a pilot when a satellite could do the same job from orbit? 60 years later, that assumption has been proven wrong, repeatedly. Here's why. Satellites are predictable. Every adversary with a halfway decent tracking system knows exactly when an American reconnaissance satellite is passing overhead. The window is measured in minutes. A sophisticated enemy, Russia, China, North Korea, simply moves what they don't want photographed before the satellite arrives, and moves it back after it passes. The U-2 doesn't announce itself. It doesn't follow a predictable orbital path. It shows up when nobody expects it. Satellites can't loiter. A satellite passes over a target at roughly 17,000 miles per hour. It gets one look, maybe two, before it's gone. The U-2 can circle a target area for hours. It can watch a convoy move. It can track a missile being fueled. It can observe activity in real time in a way no satellite in orbit can match. Weather defeats satellites more than people realize. Cloud cover, simple, ordinary cloud cover, renders optical satellites essentially useless. The U-2 flies above the weather. At 70,000 feet, there isn't a cloud in the world that can get between the Dragon Lady and her target. The U-2 carries sensors satellites simply don't have. Modern U-2s carry signals intelligence equipment, synthetic aperture radar, and real-time data relay systems that can beam intelligence directly to ground commanders while the mission is still in progress. The combination of sensors packed into that airframe, updated continuously over 7 decades, represents a capability that no single satellite platform can replicate. A retired Air Force intelligence officer put it plainly, "A satellite shows you a photograph. The U-2 shows you what's happening." That's the difference. And in the intelligence business, that difference is everything. And then there are the moments that remind you just how extraordinary this airplane really is. U-2 pilots fly alone at the edge of space, in a pressure suit, in an aircraft so difficult to land that every base that operates them keeps a chase car, a fast sports car driven by another U-2 pilot, that races down the runway, calling out altitude corrections because the pilot literally cannot see the ground properly from the cockpit. In 1966, a U-2 pilot suffered oxygen system failure at 70,000 feet. He had minutes to live. He dove the aircraft, a controlled, desperate plunge from the edge of space, and recovered at an altitude where he could breathe. He landed the airplane. He walked away. During the Cold War, U-2 pilots flew missions, knowing that if they were shot down over Soviet territory, the official American position would be that they didn't exist. No rescue, no acknowledgement, no cavalry coming. They flew anyway. Today's U-2 pilots face a different but equally demanding reality. Modern surface-to-air missile systems are far more capable than anything Gary Powers faced in 1960. And yet the Dragon Lady still flies into some of the most contested airspace on the planet, because the intelligence she brings back is worth the risk. One current U-2 pilot, speaking anonymously to an aviation publication, described the experience this way. You're sitting at 70,000 feet, completely alone, looking down at weather systems and thinking, I'm closer to space than I am to the ground. And then you remember you've got a job to do. Here's the truth about the U-2 Dragon Lady. It has survived shootdowns, diplomatic crises, budget cuts, and 60 years of people insisting that technology had finally made it obsolete. It has outlasted every replacement program the Air Force ever launched. It has outlived the Soviet Union it was built to spy on. And it's still flying, still climbing, still bringing home intelligence that no satellite, no drone, and no billion-dollar space program can replicate. Kelly Johnson built something in the California desert in 1955 that the entire modern defense industry, with all its computing power, all its money, and all its technology, has never been able to improve upon in any fundamental way. Some machines are built for a moment. The U-2 was built for every moment that followed. You don't replace a legend, you just keep flying it. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more Americans find stories like this one. And if you want to be here every time we bring one of these legends back to life, subscribe. We've got a lot more where this came from. The men who first flew the U-2 are mostly gone now, but the airplane they trusted with their lives and their country's secrets, still flying, still fighting. That's not just engineering, that's a legacy.